Hello and welcome to the Powertex Studio. I'm Michelle Brewer, Creative Director at Powertex UK, and today I'm talking about where I find inspiration for my mixed media Powertex projects. Now, I'm specifically talking about where I find inspiration because I'm here on my own, and it's something I'm asked quite a lot, and I share with you some of the frustrations that we as creatives can feel when we have a conversation with someone and ask them, where did you get the inspiration for this? And they answer, oh, everywhere. I just get it everywhere. And that's not really helpful. And it's not very inspiring. So today I'm sharing my top 5 places that I find inspiration for my projects. And I'm specifically talking about finding inspiration for projects rather than how do I feel inspired or what do I do to inspire myself if I've lost my mojo. So that's a different podcast. We'll talk about that another day. So here are my top 5. I start with a pattern sometimes. So this can be something really simple, like a beautiful piece of fabric. So I say pattern, but it could be a color. And I think even if you don't class yourself as the kind of crafter that would use fabric, so maybe quilters and sewers have lots of fabric. I think as a creative person, I defy you to go into any shop or craft show where there's fabric and not want to buy some. So I am not a sewer. I'm not somebody who quilts. I've had a go. It was disastrous. But I love the fabric. I love touching the fabric and stroking the fabric, buying the fabric. So I have a lot of fabric that I consider too beautiful to use for gluing and sticking or any of my mixed media projects. And it's gorgeous, but I also don't know what to do with it. So anyway, I've gone off on a tangent already. I mustn't do that in the podcast. But sometimes I'll pick up a piece of fabric and it's not just how it feels or the texture. It can be the colors, the pattern on it, how it looks. And this happened to me quite recently. And a whole project will be developed from this fabric. So I might look at it and think, oh, that would look marvelous. That would make the most beautiful flowing dress on an angel. Or that would be fantastic as a fairy wing, for example. And a lady in my Stars membership very recently created a gorgeous gnome with what looked like corduroy fabric on the hat. Oh, it was wonderful. And I asked her about this fabric. So I got very excited that someone had used corduroy. And it wasn't actually corduroy, but it had that kind of ribbed effect. And it was fabric taken from her father's vest. Don't worry, the father doesn't need the vest anymore. She has a limited amount of this fabric. And she just knew, she said it was perfect for this project. It was calling out for the vest. So her little gnome, she called Big Al after her father, which is wonderful. And his hat and his trousers and shirt were made from her father's vest. And I love that. I love that her project, whenever she looks at it now, not just in the name of the project, but what she's made has such strong evocative links to her beloved father. And the fabric is gorgeous. So I know that it's not just me that finds inspiration from fabric, but quite often I can start there. So that's my number 1, finding a piece of fabric or material or something, and then a whole project. It could just be calling out to you, couldn't it? You could be looking at it thinking, that needs to go on a bauble, for example. So number 1, fabric. Number 2 is trees. Now, I know trees sounds a little bit generic. So specifically tree trunks, I find a lot of inspiration in trees. And I don't mean like the whole tree, you know, when you can look at the whole tree and think, oh, that would be a beautiful painting. Of course it would. But when you get close up and you look, I mean, I've got so many photographs of the close up of a tree trunk. And depending on the type of tree, they can all be different. But they have marvelous textures. They're nice in real life to touch the tree. So even the feel of the actual sense of feeling the tree, touching the tree, can make you want to recreate that. So the textures in the bark of a tree are a huge point of inspiration for me. I've had to say trees, it's not just the tree trunk and the bark, like all over it. The roots, how the roots become twisted and entangled. I think they can be really beautiful. And there's so many things that I want to recreate on them. So I might look, and not just from a sculpting point of view. So I don't look and think, oh, I want to sculpt the tree. Quite often, I think I want to recreate that texture that it has all of these deep sort of crackles and crevices going down in all different directions. And they feel that, you know, they can feel quite smooth, even over the rough looking crackles and interesting patterns that are on them. We have branches and leaves. There are so many different components to trees, and all of the different types of trees. I mean, in the autumn, the colors are wonderful, and I think they can provide the base of many different projects. So the autumnal colors, and if you're lucky enough to live somewhere, you can go out and experience walking amongst the trees that are, what's the word, losing their leaves. I was going to say molting, but that's what animals do when they lose their fur. When the trees are molting, shedding their leaves, there must be a word for that. But I find that there's so much inspiration with them that that would be number 2 for me. So trees. And this definitely leads on from the trees. So the two often go hand in hand. There's moss and lichen. So I've called this the forest floor. So leading on from trees, my number 3 would be the forest floor. And so moving down the tree, the roots quite often have a lot of moss covering them. So that provides so much inspiration. If you can get up really close and touch the moss, oh, it's a wonderful sensory experience. And be very careful. You should be respectful of the moss and the beautiful trees. But the smell, I love that mulch. It's winter here, so I have experienced this quite recently where I've gone out. I love squelching through the forest floor, and there's a lot of hidden treasure under the ferns, the bracken. There will still be some autumnal colours to be found, even though it's quite frosty at the moment. There's lots and lots of treasures, natural treasures. So there's twigs, there's leaves, there's stones, there's wonderful bits of mulch and mud that you can grab the colours. You might want to recreate that texture, and you have to zoom in. I think you have to not just look at the whole picture and think, oh, I can never paint the carpet of bluebells, for example, on the forest floor. That's an amazing painting. It's been done lots of times. But you've got to zoom in and see those details and things that other people might miss. So you might be on a dog walk and it's getting trampled and you're chatting to your friend or on the phone. But imagine if you were lucky enough to be close to the floor like a dog, and all of those details that you could pick up and then take back and use for your inspiration. And I think it works for paintings and 2D work as much as it does for 3D sculptures. So the forest floor is another place that I find a lot of inspiration. I've deliberately left out flora here, so I haven't talked about flowers particularly. Of course, they're so beautiful and inspirational. But for me, the devil is in the detail. So I remember somebody coming to our school when I was very small and talking about orchids and how clever they were and how they worked on the inside. It's amazing. And it's never left me, that fascination for orchids. So I know lots of people love them and they're lovely flowers. But for me, it's not the looking at how they look or enjoying them as just a beautiful thing. It's what they can do and how they work on the inside, and the dew that they collect and the nectar, and all of that is what made the orchid so special for me. So details are what I get excited about. And there's a lot of detail on the forest floor. Number 4 is books and stories. So I find books and stories much more inspirational than I do movies or anything on a screen. And I love to read. I'm a voracious reader, and it really does encourage your imagination, just reading stories and descriptive words, which allows you to build the picture in your mind. So I find a lot of inspiration can come from those, and they don't necessarily have to be fantasy books, you know, about sort of dragons or dinosaurs, although I do love the old magic faraway tree stories. There are all sorts of stories that can provoke feelings, emotions, pictures in your mind that give you inspiration to go on and create. So feelings and emotions are a big driver for me to go on and create something. And it's not necessarily about expressing those emotions for me, but it's about being able to place them somewhere. So I do draw inspiration from books and stories. It's that's always been with me. And I do struggle if I've read a book and then it's translated into film and then I see the film. So case in point, really, recently was Jilly Cooper's Rivals. Now, I have been a fan of Jilly Cooper all my life. I really love her stories. They're a great comfort book to me. And her characters in the book feel like old friends. They've been around all my life. I started reading her when I was much too young, but her first book, Riders, was all about horses and show jumping. So of course I was going to read it. And I didn't pay too much attention to the rude bits. Rivals was on screen. It was adapted for the TV recently. And I mean, it was brilliant. It was brilliantly done. It was absolutely outrageous and it was ridiculous. But Rupert, the main character, was nothing like he was described. So in the book, he's very tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and much is made of his blonde-haired, blue-eyed beautifulness. And in the adaptation, he was very dark and swarthy, and he was not the Rupert that I had imagined. So I think books, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but books allow you to create pictures in your head, and that can bring inspiration for me, and the stories and things that it's talking about. So that's my number 4. And number 5. So this is an easy one to talk about. It's the seaside. Again, it's very broad. As you can see, I've got two seaside pictures behind me, two seaside paintings, the seascape and the beach. And it's very broad. It's like me saying the forest or trees. But there's so much at the beach or the seaside or the ocean, whatever you want to call it. So you've got the water, the sea itself. And, you've got colour, you've got the waves. It can be calm, and it sits and it just looks like there's 1,000 diamonds glinting off of it when the sun or the moon hits the water and reflects. The sea itself, just the smells, whether it's freezing cold, dipping your toes and having the tide run over them, all of those things feel very inspirational. And that's before we get on to the sea creatures. So the things that live in the sea, and they're an endless source of inspiration because we haven't even found them all. We don't even know what lies beneath. I mean, that's always a scary thought, isn't it? But there are these incredible animals and creatures, and plants that live in the sea. They're a great source of inspiration. And not even, things like the starfish and crabs. There's so many. So the sea and sea creatures. And then we have all of the textures that the seaside brings. So the sand is wonderful. And I use sand a lot in my mixed media work. So whether it's the very fine dust or the small sandy rocks, and I've got fine and coarse sand and coloured sand. Get really excited about sand. I use it by mixing it with paint, or I create a structure paste from it. There's so many things you can do. So there's textures, whether that's sort of the barnacles on the rocks or the crushed shells that you have. I love, just when you're putting your toes into the wet sand and drawing patterns and shapes and lines and digging. I just love putting my hands into the sand, when you're sort of digging down. It feels amazing. So the textures I get very excited about. And fossils. So I found, was it in 2023? I found my first ever fossil. I love fossils. Get really excited about dinosaurs and all of those things. So to find a fossil in the wild, not one I bought, not one that somebody has placed there, I was really excited about that. So fossils, and of course we have a whole thing on ammonites. We get really excited about ammonites, don't we, in mixed media and Powertex. They make a great source of inspiration and basis for a project. There are rocks. You've got the barnacles on the rocks and all the things that sort of dry out and stick. And then, I'm just so excited about the seaweed. You can see why I find a lot of inspiration at the beach, can't you? And shells. I mean, seashells, that's a whole thing all by itself. So I think to summarize with where I find inspiration, they're quite broad things, but for me, it's about finding a detail in something. So finding, a particular piece of bark on a tree trunk, or maybe there's a tiny hole. And when you can only see these things by getting up close and really looking, maybe touching, because it doesn't always have to be what you see first. You might be running your hand along a bed of moss or moss on a wall. I get really excited. I've got lots of pictures of moss on my phone that are only for me. They're for me to look at and maybe use in my work. But you could touch something and think, I want to look closer at that. And then you get closer to the detail. So it could be a texture. It could be a colour. It could be a curve, the way a branch curls around. that's the kind of detail that will start a project for me. So that inspires me. And I think, oh, I love that. I want to recreate that. Or that, when you're a child and you lay down, when you have all the time in the world, which I no longer have, and you lay on your back and you're looking at the clouds and you pick out patterns, and my children do it quite a lot. They like to look at it and say, oh, mummy, I can see a dragon in the cloud. But you start with the detail and then that looks like the crook of an arm. That looks like an owl's wing. I've got a couple of trees on the hill outside my studio, and they look like they've a family that the big tree has got its arms around, the mummy tree and the baby tree, and it's just really lovely. But finding a detail is where I get inspiration for nearly all of my projects. Something will come and I think, oh, I love that, and I want to turn that into something. So the inspiration, it becomes like a key to unlocking the project. I mean, these are things, I think they're already out there. The shells, the ammonites, the shapes, the water, the colors, they already exist. And it's about recreating those and turning it into something that I enjoy making and I'm going to have fun sharing. So let me know, where do you find inspiration? That's what I want to know. Share it with other people. Share it with me. You can send me a private message. You can drop your comment here, or find me on Facebook in the Powertex Studio. It's a wonderful group that we have on Facebook, and there's lots of inspiration there. We can find inspiration from each other. I would love for you to join me again. This podcast goes out every Monday, and I look forward to sharing more stories from the Powertex Studio with you. Bye-bye.